Family, before we open the doors to tonight's story, let me begin with a truth that shakes the heart. A billionaire CEO opened a DNA report expecting routine data, only to discover he was matched with 3 children. Children he never knew existed, all connected to the woman he once loved and lost. The moment that screen lit up, his entire world shifted. A man who ruled boardrooms with confidence suddenly felt the ground slide from beneath him, and 3 small lives, quietly growing in a faraway town, were about to collide with a truth none of them could have predicted. But before we walk deeper into this journey, my beautiful family, welcome back to Mr. Williams' Storytime. I need you to do something important. Please like this video, share it so someone else can receive this message, comment your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story time. Your support helps this family grow, and I am truly grateful for each and every one of you. As you listen, keep one question close. What happens when the truth a person avoids finally reaches them? When the past they walked away from knocks on the door they thought would stay closed forever? Stay with me, because the answers waiting in this story carry lessons about love, responsibility, fear, courage, and the power of showing up when it matters most. This is just the beginning. Family, now that we've opened with the moment that flipped Warren Herman's life upside down, let's take a breath and step back, because to understand how shocking that DNA match truly was, you need to know the man he used to be and the woman whose absence he never healed from. Before headlines crowned him a financial genius, before investors whispered his name like a guarantee of success, before he walked stages with polished confidence, there was a young man who simply wanted to build something meaningful. Warren wasn't always the powerful figure people saw on magazine covers. He once lived in a cramped apartment with mismatched furniture and a dream far bigger than his budget. And in those early days, there was someone beside him who believed in his vision long before anyone else did. Her name was Brianna, not the baker you'll meet later, not the mother of 3 extraordinary children, but a young woman who stood beside him when their world was held together with hope, cheap coffee, and late-night planning sessions. They were partners in a way that made strangers smile without knowing why. She brought warmth to his sharp edges. He brought direction to her gentle ambition. Together they mapped out futures on napkins, notebooks, even the backs of old receipts. Their dreams were messy, sincere, and full of promise. But life has a quiet way of shifting people without warning. As Warren rose in his career, his days stretched longer. Morning meetings became late-night flights, conversations shortened, moments shrunk, and Brianna, though strong and capable, slowly became a shadow standing outside the world he was building. There was no dramatic fight, no explosive confrontation, just a steady fading, a distance that grew silently until their marriage felt like a house with empty rooms. When they finally divorced, the world didn't blink. No scandal, no reporters waiting outside a courthouse, just 2 people signing papers and walking in different directions, each carrying pieces of the life they once promised to build together. Warren buried himself in work. He filled his schedule to avoid facing the silence that followed, and although success lined his pockets, it couldn't fill the cold space inside him. Brianna, meanwhile, packed away the remnants of their shared life and drove 3 hours away to a town where the noise of the city couldn't reach her. She opened a small bakery, Whispering Hearth, a place filled with the simple warmth she had once tried to nurture at home. People who stepped inside felt an immediate comfort, not knowing it came from a woman who had rebuilt her heart with yeast, sugar, and determination. Now, family, why does this history matter? Because the DNA test that startled Warren wasn't just a surprise, it was a door being pushed open by the past he thought had settled. A past filled with love that never truly disappeared, mistakes that were never corrected, and truths that had gone unspoken for far too long. At the moment he saw the results, he wasn't just a CEO facing a personal issue. He was a man being forced to confront the very life he had walked away from. And as we move deeper into this story, you'll see how every choice they made, every missed call, every unspoken worry, every long night spent apart, played a part in shaping the moment when 3 children entered his awareness. Children who should have grown up with 2 parents, but instead grew up with one mother carrying the weight of protecting all of them. Family, keep listening, because what's ahead is not just about secrets being revealed. It's about a man learning what responsibility truly means and a woman discovering that protection and honesty must eventually meet. This is where their worlds begin to collide again, not with anger, but with questions that can no longer be ignored. Long before the DNA report forced Warren Herman to confront a truth he never expected, the world knew him as a man almost impossible to reach, commanding, disciplined, and intimidating without trying to be. To the public, Warren appeared perfectly composed. He was the 34-year-old mastermind behind Herman Dynamics, a global powerhouse whose influence touched energy, biotech innovations, transportation systems, and every sector that promised a futuristic tomorrow. His name carried weight, his decisions shifted markets, and his signature at the bottom of a document could send an entire industry into motion. His workdays were a steady march of meetings that never seemed to end, presentations that dazzled investors, and meticulously scheduled appearances crafted to keep his image flawless. People often whispered that Warren didn't rise to the top. He built a ladder and climbed it faster than anyone else had the courage to. His suits were sharp, his expressions controlled, and his voice carried the measured calm of someone who rarely allowed emotion to break through the surface. But looks deceive. Behind his polished presence was a man who lived by routines that left almost no room for breath. He woke before dawn, reviewed market reports while sipping plain black coffee, and spent each morning giving orders that teams scrambled to carry out. Afternoons were a rush of negotiations, strategy sessions, and global conference calls. Nights were reserved for dinners with partners who saw him less as a person and more as a doorway to opportunities. He was surrounded, yet profoundly alone. His penthouse perched above the noise of the city was immaculate, beautifully furnished but strangely untouched. There were no family photos on the walls, no childhood drawings on the fridge, no warmth in the living room. Whenever guests stepped inside, they marveled at the view. But if they looked past the floor-to-ceiling windows, they would notice the silence, a silence that clung to Warren even when he wasn't home. Despite his success, something within him remained hollow. He had the kind of power most people dream about, yet none of it filled the ache he carried. The emptiness had a source, one he rarely acknowledged even in private. Her, the woman whose laughter used to echo through small rooms they once shared, the woman who understood him before the world demanded pieces of him he could never get back, the woman who walked away quietly, leaving behind a space he tried to ignore by piling more work onto his shoulders. Whenever a moment of stillness crept into his day, memories of her slipped in like an unwelcome guest. A glimpse of her smile, a flash of her handwriting, the sound of her voice saying his name in a way no one else ever could. But Warren never allowed himself to linger on those memories. Not when he had deadlines tightening around him, not when investors expected brilliance, not when he had constructed an entire public identity built on control. To the world, Warren was unstoppable. Inside, he was a man who had outrun his personal life so thoroughly that he didn't realize how much he had lost. Even his closest team members sensed something distant about him. Rivka, his longtime assistant, once described him to a colleague as a man surrounded by noise who somehow lives in silence. He wasn't cold, he simply kept everything he cared about locked so far away that no one could touch it, including himself. This was the Warren who opened that envelope, not a reckless man, not a cruel one, just someone who had surrendered so much to ambition that he hadn't noticed how empty his hands had become. And when the DNA results confronted him, they didn't just surprise him. They cracked open a part of him he had sealed shut for years. The world knew Warren Herman, the empire builder, but the world had forgotten Warren, the human being, and deep down, so had he. Before Herman Dynamics became a towering force, before Warren was surrounded by executives who hung on his every word, there was a chapter of his life written in smaller, humbler spaces, spaces where ambition shared a seat with love, laughter, and youthful belief. And at the center of that chapter was Brianna. She wasn't the polished entrepreneur the world would later meet. She wasn't the woman who could run a bakery with flawless grace. Back then, she was simply a warm, bright presence who carried hope the way others carried breath, effortlessly and without hesitation. When Warren first met her, she wasn't impressed by his intelligence or his growing ambition. Instead, she noticed things most people overlooked, the way he tapped the table when he was thinking, the way he listened intently, even when he disagreed, the way he softened around kindness without realizing it. She saw the man beneath the surface, not the future CEO, but the young dreamer who stayed up late sketching ideas on scrap paper, the man who wanted to build something meaningful, not just profitable. Their relationship began quietly, without theatrics. Late-night study sessions at worn-out desks, walks home under dim streetlights, conversations that lasted long after restaurants had closed. They were partners in every sense. Brianna encouraged him when he doubted himself. She had this gentle way of grounding his ambition without dimming it, and Warren in turn cherished the calm she brought. With her, life slowed enough for him to breathe. They married young, two people convinced that love, effort, and loyalty were enough to conquer anything. And for a time, it truly felt that way. Their first home together wasn't impressive. It had uneven tiles, a leaky faucet, and a kitchen so small they often bumped into each other while cooking. But they made it their own, filling the space with shared meals, scattered notebooks, and laughter that seemed to brighten the walls. Brianna kept a battered recipe binder she carried everywhere. They celebrated small victories with small celebrations, buying a second-hand table, signing a lease for a slightly bigger apartment, Warren landing his first major contract. Their love wasn't dramatic. It was steady, familiar, and deeply rooted in everyday moments. But as Warren climbed higher, their lives slowly shifted. Boardrooms replaced their shared kitchen counters. Red-eye flights replaced evenings spent sitting together on the couch. It became busier, then busier still, until days blended into weeks, and the sound of his footsteps coming home late at night became the new normal. Brianna tried to keep pace, but she wasn't built for a life that demanded constant sacrifice without rest. She reached for him, again and again, but the distance between them stretched wider each time, not because of a lack of love, but because he was slipping into a world where she didn't know how to follow. The small routines they once shared slowly faded. Meals were eaten separately, conversation shortened, and the dreams they once built together began to feel like they belonged to someone else. Brianna held on until holding on became too painful. When she finally stepped away, she did so quietly, with dignity, leaving behind a life that no longer had space for her. For Warren, the loss didn't hit all at once. He told himself the separation was a temporary detour, something they'd come back from, when the timing was better. But timing never fixed what had already been neglected. Even after the divorce, her presence lingered in memories he didn't dare revisit, the love she gave without reservation. She wasn't just a chapter in his life. She was the part of his story he never fully healed from, and the day he opened that DNA report, he wasn't just confronted with 3 children. He was confronted with the truth that Brianna had carried something far heavier than he ever realized. When the day finally came for Warren and Brianna to separate, there was no shouting, no broken plates, no storm of accusations. It faded with quiet exhaustion, like a candle that had burned too long without being tended. They sat across from each other at a table that had once held so many shared meals. Now it held a stack of papers neither of them wanted to touch. Warren, dressed in a tailored suit straight from another long meeting, looked worn in a way he couldn't hide. Brianna, with her gentle posture and steady eyes, seemed equally drained. It was the kind of heaviness that doesn't arrive overnight. It is built over hundreds of missed moments and thousands of unspoken concerns. There weren't many words exchanged. What could they say that hadn't already been said through silence? He apologized, quietly, sincerely, but far too late. She listened, but her heart had already endured more than she could carry. They signed the papers, 2 signatures, 2 separate futures, and that was it. No final embrace, no last-minute reconsideration, just a door closing behind 2 people who once promised forever. Brianna gathered what little she wanted to keep from their shared life. She didn't take much, just her recipe binder, some clothes, a few personal items, and she didn't want their home. It no longer felt like a place she belonged. She left the city soon after, driving for hours until skyscrapers turned into open fields and traffic noise softened into the comfort of smaller roads. She settled in a quiet town where people greeted each other without rushing, where neighbors remembered birthdays, and where no one recognized her as the ex-wife of a rising corporate titan. There she opened Whispering Hearth, a bakery that would become the warmth she once tried to maintain in her marriage. The town embraced her gently. Customers returned not just for the pastries, but for the kindness in her smile, the calm in her voice, and the familiarity she brought to their mornings. In that little bakery, Brianna discovered something she didn't expect. She could be happy again, not in the way she imagined when she was younger, but in a way that felt steady and honest. Meanwhile, Warren stayed in the life they had once shared, but now the space felt hollow. He kept the penthouse with its sweeping view, the one they had once celebrated moving into. He kept the company that had required so much of him. He kept the schedule packed with meetings, the long workdays, the success that came with hard decisions. But he lost the warmth. After the divorce, he threw himself into work with an intensity that bordered on punishing. He filled every hour, every minute, every second with tasks and obligations, anything to avoid thinking about the quiet apartment waiting for him at night. People around him noticed the shift. He became sharper, more focused, less patient. He wasn't cruel, just distant, as though part of him had been sealed away. Sometimes he'd reach for his phone to share a small victory, a joke, a thought, only to remember there was no one to send it to. He told himself that their breakup was inevitable, that their lives had drifted apart naturally. But deep down he knew he had played a role in the distance that grew between them. And he carried that truth like a stone in his chest, one he refused to acknowledge. Years passed. Brianna built a life rooted in community and quiet joy. Warren built an empire that impressed the world, but left him feeling strangely incomplete. Their paths had separated, completely, or so they believed. Neither of them could have imagined that 6 years later, a simple envelope would bring their worlds crashing back into each other. Not because of unresolved love, but because of 3 small children whose existence would change everything. Rain pressed against the glass walls of Herman Tower like a restless rhythm, tapping steadily as the city moved below in muted motion. It was late afternoon, the kind of gray hour when the skyline seemed to blend into the clouds above it. Inside Warren's office, the lights glowed softly over a table scattered with partnership documents, graphs, and reports awaiting his review. He sat with his sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows, eyes fixed on a proposal that would shape the next quarter's investments. His expression was focused, calm, disciplined, everything people expected from him. Nothing in his posture suggested that his life was minutes away from shifting course. A knock broke through the quiet. Rivka stepped in, her voice low. "Mr. Herman, there's a courier here who insists this envelope must be handed to you personally." Her tone wasn't alarmed, but it held a hint of curiosity. Couriers rarely insisted on direct delivery in a tower where protocols were strict and secure. "Did he say who it's from?" Warren asked without looking up. "No return name, no organization, just your name on the front." She extended the sealed envelope. That got his attention. Warren set down his tablet and accepted it. The envelope was plain, too plain for business correspondence, and it carried no branding, no stamp, no clues, just his name written in clean black ink. "Did he sign anything?" Warren asked. "No." He refused, said it wasn't needed. Warren frowned slightly. He wasn't a man easily rattled, but the situation felt off just enough to make him pause. He dismissed Rivka gently, then studied the envelope again. The rain outside grew heavier, streaking the glass in blurred lines as if the city itself were watching. With a controlled motion, he opened the seal. A single folded sheet slid out. The message was short. "Mr. Herman, please review the DNA matches from the Miller Health Lab. There may be an error. 3 close matches tied to your profile. A concerned colleague." Warren stared at the words. Once, twice. For a moment, nothing made sense. The rain softened in his ears. His heartbeat grew louder. "Miller Health Lab," he murmured to himself. Then he remembered. 2 months earlier, Herman Dynamics had funded a large health initiative, encouraging employees, including senior leadership, to submit anonymous genetic samples for wellness analysis. Warren had participated to reinforce transparency. It was all standard, harmless data for research. Nothing about it should have produced a message like this. He unlocked his tablet, accessing the internal portal where the anonymized results were stored. With a few swift taps, he opened his profile. Nothing. Then a new notification blinked, one that hadn't been there before. A flagged error. When he tapped it open, a digital report expanded on the screen. Rows of coded data, colored markers, then 3 matches, all approximately 6 years old, all directly tied to his genetic markers, all connected to someone named Breonna Miller. His breath shallowly caught. He blinked, as though the numbers might change if he looked again. But they didn't. His hand lowered slowly from the screen, and for the first time in years, Warren felt his composure slip, confusion tightening into disbelief, then disbelief tightening into something colder, heavier. The envelope rested beside him like a silent witness. Rain continued its steady tap against the windows. The city kept moving, but Warren could not move at all. For several long seconds, Warren simply sat there, staring at the glowing screen as though it had betrayed him. The numbers didn't shift. The data didn't blur. Everything remained painfully, unmistakably clear. 3 matches, 6 years old, linked to Breonna. His pulse began to thump harder, steady at first, then quicker, until it pulsed in his ears like an uneven drumbeat. He leaned back in his chair, but the movement brought no relief. His mind was running faster than his lungs could keep up. He checked the report again, and again. There had to be a mistake, a system error, a mislabeled sample, anything that wasn't what it appeared to be. He straightened suddenly and tapped the intercom. Rivka canceled the next hour. Understood, she replied, unaware of the storm building on the other side of the wall. The next moment, he was already dialing the director of the lab. The line rang once, twice, a third time. "Dr. Keene," a voice answered. "It's Warren Herman." His tone was clipped, breath tight. "I need immediate clarification on a flagged report. It's coded under my wellness profile." He heard papers shuffle quickly, followed by renewed seriousness. "Yes, sir. I see the flag. It triggered a cross-reference protocol earlier today." "What does that mean?" Warren asked, impatience seeping through. "It means something in your sample matched with profiles from external submissions. The system automatically rechecked for accuracy. And—" Warren's hand tightened around the phone. "Sir." The cross-reference repeated the same results. Warren stood up abruptly, his chair rolled back, colliding softly against the wall. He pressed a hand on the desk to steady himself, but it didn't help. "I want the samples verified manually," he said. "Every marker, every step." "They've already been rerun," the director admitted quietly. 3 times. "The probability of error is extremely low." Warren felt a hollow sensation expand in his chest. "And the identities tied to those matches?" he forced out. The director hesitated. "Confidential medical records connected to a clinic outside the city limit. The primary patient contact listed is a woman named—" "I already know," Warren cut in. His throat tightened. "Thank you." He ended the call before his control shattered. Silence wrapped around the office in a way that felt different than usual. He stared at the tablet again, though he already knew what he'd see. The 3 colored markers blinking softly on the screen, pulsing like small heartbeats. In that moment, each blink felt like a blow. His chest rose and fell faster. His breathing turned sharp. The room seemed to shrink around him. He pressed both palms on the desk, lowering his head between his shoulders. Despite his height, his strength, and the authority he commanded daily, he suddenly felt fragile, held together by a thin thread. He whispered to no one, "How?" 6 years ago, right around the time he and Breonna split apart, right around the time he wasn't present for anything but work, his mind sped through memories he had long pushed away. Conversations he cut short, messages he answered with one-word replies, moments he missed entirely. A cold ache spread through him. As he lifted his head, the screen blinked again. 3 matches, 3 children. A soft thump echoed in his ears, syncing with his heartbeat. It grew louder, louder, until it was all he could hear. He wasn't just shocked, he was terrified. Terrified of what the truth meant, terrified of what it said about the man he had become, terrified that somewhere out there, 3 young lives existed while he, a father by blood, hadn't even known to breathe in their direction. He pushed the tablet away and straightened slowly, hands trembling despite his effort to appear steady. Everything had changed, whether he was ready or not. Warren stood in the middle of his office as though the ground beneath him had shifted. Minutes earlier, he had been a man in control, focused, calculated, composed. Now he felt unsteady, as if the world had tilted and he was the only one trying to find balance. He sank into the nearest chair, not the executive one behind his desk, but a smaller seat near the window. Rain streaked down the glass, carving faint paths across the view. He watched it silently, his breath shallow. His hands were still trembling. It startled him. He hadn't felt this way since his early 20s, back when failures felt personal and small disappointments pierced deeper than they should. But this wasn't disappointment. This was fear layered with guilt, woven tightly with confusion. 3 children, his children, children he had never held, never seen, never even knew existed. He rubbed his palms together, trying to steady them, but the shaking persisted. For a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, the tremor in his fingers felt almost unreal. His thoughts spiraled through questions he couldn't answer. Why didn't Brianna tell him? Did she try? Had he overlooked something? Had he been too distant to even notice? He could picture her clearly, Brianna from all those years ago, trying to reach him while he drowned himself in responsibilities he thought were essential. Back then he believed he had time to return to their life, time to fix what he neglected. But time had run out long before he realized it. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. 6 years, he whispered. 6 years of birthdays he missed. 6 years of first steps, first words, bedtime stories, scraped knees, and giggles he had never heard. 6 years of being absent without knowing he was absent at all. A weight settled on his chest, heavy, suffocating. Suddenly he stood, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair. He didn't even think it through. Instinct carried him forward. He paced the room once, then stopped abruptly. He needed answers. He needed truth. He needed Brianna. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now. He walked to the door but paused before opening it. A sliver of doubt crept in. Should he call first? Would she even pick up? Would she slam the door in his face the moment she saw him? He inhaled slowly, steadying his breath. Regardless of how she reacted, he had to try. He grabbed his phone and keys. His hand shook again, but he pushed through it. As he reached the hallway, he stopped long enough to murmur to himself, "I should have been there." It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't a justification. It was an admission, one he had never spoken aloud until now. He moved toward the elevator with long, determined strides. His reflection in the polished metal doors looked unfamiliar, a powerful man stripped of certainty, driven now by something far more human than ambition. Before stepping inside, he paused and looked directly into the camera, addressing the viewers in his mind the same way a storyteller pauses for clarity. Family, if you were Warren, what would you do next? Would you go after the truth, no matter how painful it might be? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to know. The elevator chimed. The doors opened. Warren stepped in, ready to face the one person who held the answers, and the 3 children whose existence was now carved into the center of his world. He didn't know what he'd find. He didn't know what Brianna would say. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had run from enough. It was time to show up. The morning light touched the windows of Whispering Hearth with a soft glow, giving the bakery a gentle warmth long before customers filled its chairs. Brianna moved through the space with a quiet rhythm, flipping dough, dusting flour across the wooden counter, setting trays in neat rows. The air carried the scent of cinnamon, warm butter, and rising bread, wrapping around her like a familiar embrace. She worked without rushing, her motions smooth from years of repetition. A brush of egg wash here, a sprinkle of sugar there. Each task done with a care that made her pastries not just food, but comfort. As the ovens hummed, the front door clicked open. Mr. Halpern, one of the regulars, stepped in with his usual slow shuffle. He was well into his 70s and never arrived without a newspaper tucked under his arm. "Morning, Miss Brianna," he said with a smile that deepened the lines on his face. "Good morning, Mr. Halpern. Your brioche is warm and ready," she replied, already setting his favorite pastry on a plate. He beamed as if she'd handed him something far grander than bread. "You take good care of us." Brianna only smiled and continued prepping the counter. Moments like this, ordinary, steady, unhurried, had become the pillars of her days. Soon the bell chimed again, letting in 2 neighborhood kids who stopped by before school. They burst through the door with the enthusiasm only children possessed, their laughter filling the room, before their footsteps even reached the counter. "Miss Brianna, are the honey rolls done?" "Fresh out of the oven," she answered, sliding a tray from behind the glass. Their delighted gasps made her chuckle. By 8 o'clock, a small line wound near the entrance. People from the community, teachers, mechanics, office workers, came in not only for the pastries but for the welcome Brianna offered so naturally. A warm greeting here, a gentle check-in there. She remembered birthdays, school events, recovery milestones. The bakery wasn't just her workplace, it was a small sanctuary for everyone who stepped through the door. The ovens released another wave of heat, carrying the fragrance of vanilla and toasted sugar. Brianna wiped her brow with the back of her wrist and set a tray of golden croissants on the cooling rack. Sunlight glinted off the flaky layers as if celebrating another successful batch. She paused for a moment, taking in the scene, the soft chatter of customers, the clink of cups on saucers, the sound of a child giggling near the window. It was peaceful, steady, and full of the quiet beauty she had never known she needed. Her life here was built from simple joys, neighbors who cared, mornings fragrant with baked goods, and a sense of belonging that wrapped around her with gentle certainty. Whispering Hearth wasn't just a bakery, it was a heartbeat, a place rebuilt from the pieces of a life she once believed had fallen apart for good. And on this particular morning, as she moved through the warmth of her ovens and the sound of familiar voices, she had no idea that her past, long tucked away like a letter in a drawer, was walking toward her, step by step. At the back of the bakery, behind a half-closed curtain, 3 small figures sat around a low wooden table, their voices rising and falling in soft bursts of chatter. It was their usual spot, close enough for Brianna to keep an eye on them, far enough for customers to enjoy their pastries in peace. Neri was the first to notice the shift in the morning rush. She always noticed things first. Her dark eyes sparkled with curiosity as she leaned closer to the window, examining the sunlight reflected on the glass jar that held crayons. She tapped her finger lightly against it, fascinated. "Look," Mama said, "sunlight can bend," she murmured, tilting the jar slightly. "If light can bend, does that mean it can change its mind?" Olin barely glanced up from the wooden puzzle he was fitting together piece by piece. He sat with steady focus, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "Light doesn't have a mind," he said quietly, not unkindly. "It just moves, but it moves where it wants," Neri insisted, sliding a crayon behind her ear. Olin stayed silent, but the corner of his mouth lifted, his version of a grin. Then there was Merritt, bold, loud, and hilariously dramatic. She stood atop her chair, one foot planted like a tiny explorer surveying her kingdom. "You're gonna fall," Olin muttered without looking up. "I won't." She immediately wobbled. Olin caught her arm gently, preventing a tumble. Merritt blinked, then grinned as if she had planned the near fall all along. Their dynamic was a small world in itself, Neri's endless questions, Olin's quiet watchfulness, Merritt's confident flair. Together they balanced one another in ways only siblings could. Neri now flipped open a picture book and pointed excitedly to a page filled with drawings of planets. "If we lived on Saturn, would cupcakes float?" she asked. Merritt gasped. "Cupcakes floating? I would eat all of them. They'd float, but you'd float too. You wouldn't catch anything." Merritt crossed her arms dramatically. "I would catch something." Brianna approached them with 3 small plates, each carrying a mini pastry fresh from the oven. Her smile softened as she set the treats down. "Breakfast break?" she asked. "Yes," all 3 replied, their voices blending into a warm chorus. Neri beamed and tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, can we read about stars after? I want to know which one is the biggest." "We will," Brianna promised. Merritt pointed at her pastry. "This one is mine, right? The biggest one?" "It's the same size as the others," Brianna said with a laugh. Merritt gasped dramatically. "Then I will pretend it's huge." Olin simply picked up his treat and offered Brianna a small nod, his silent thank you. Watching them, Brianna felt the same mix of tenderness and protectiveness she felt every morning. They were her world, and for now, in this warm bakery filled with familiar voices and sweet scents, they were safe. She intended to keep it that way. As the morning settled into its comfortable rhythm, Brianna wiped her hands on her apron and paused near the counter. She watched her children quietly, Neri humming while flipping her book, Olin studying the last piece of his puzzle, Merritt pretending her pastry was some heroic treasure. A warm ache filled her chest. Love, yes, but also fear. Not the kind of fear that arrives suddenly, the kind that grows slowly, carefully, until it becomes part of a person's daily breath. Brianna carried that fear every moment of her life. 6 years ago, after one final attempt to reach Warren, She had sat at the small kitchen table of her old apartment, clutching a pen and shaking fingers. In front of her lay a half-written letter, the kind that began with hope and ended with dread. She had written about her pregnancy. She had written about the 3 lives growing inside her. She had written that she didn't want to raise them alone, that she wanted him to know, that she wanted him to care. Then she stopped writing, because each time she tried to picture the moment she would hand him the letter, another picture overshadowed it, his absence, the unread messages, the missed dinners, the constant pressure he lived under, the world he was building that had no space for stillness, let alone 3 unexpected children. What if he demanded custody? What if he said the children didn't fit into his life? What if they became something people whispered about in business circles? What if being known by him meant being exposed? The fear hit her like a cold wave, so she folded the letter gently, as if it were fragile, and tucked it into a drawer. She never mailed it, never brought it up again, never tried to contact him afterward. Instead, she chose a quieter path, one where she could protect her children from the chaos of his world. She poured her entire being into raising them with joy, stability, and a kind of love she feared they might not receive anywhere else. But the secret weighed on her. Some nights, after the bakery closed and the children slept, she would sit alone at the kitchen table, the same type of table where everything began years ago, and the guilt would settle in beside her. Did I make the right choice? Should I have tried harder? Will they hate me one day for keeping this from him? Was I protecting them or protecting myself from heartbreak? She never spoke these questions aloud, but they clung to her, quietly shaping her decisions. A soft laugh from Marit pulled her back to the present. Brianna forced a smile. Her heart tugged in 2 directions, the life she built and the truth she buried. And then, ding! The bell above the bakery door rang sharply, slicing through the air like a signal she didn't yet understand. Brianna looked up instinctively. Her smile faltered, because the moment that bell chimed, her past stepped closer. The bell above the bakery door chimed again, this time not with the familiar lightness of a regular customer, but with a sound that seemed to cut straight through the room. Brianna turned toward the entrance, almost instinctively, a polite smile already forming. It vanished the moment she saw him. Warren stood framed in the doorway, rain still clinging to the shoulders of his coat, his hair slightly damp from the storm outside. For a second, he didn't move, neither did she. The warmth of whispering hearth, the sweet smell of pastries, the quiet hum of customers, it all seemed to fade. The air stilled, holding its breath between them. Brianna felt her heartbeat stumble. Warren's chest rose slowly, as if he were forcing himself to breathe. He didn't look like the polished CEO from the magazines. He looked like a man caught between fear, hope, and disbelief. Their eyes locked. Time didn't slow. It simply stopped. Behind the counter, Brianna's fingers tightened on the edge of a tray. She wasn't prepared for this. Not today. Not in the middle of a busy morning. Not with her heart still, carrying the weight of 6 hidden years. Warren stepped in, his movements careful, almost hesitant. He scanned the bakery, not with a businessman's sharp gaze, but with the uncertainty of someone stepping into territory he'd long abandoned. His voice, when it finally emerged, was quiet, almost fragile. Brianna. Hearing her name in his voice again felt like a door opening and closing at the same time. Before she could respond, a soft rustling broke the stillness. 3 small heads peeked from behind the curtain near the back tables. Neri was the first, wide-eyed, curious, peering at Warren as though trying to determine if he was friendly or frightening. Olin's face appeared next, his expression tense, protective, his small hands gripping the edge of the curtain. Marit squeezed between them both, bold as ever, standing on tiptoe to get a better look. Warren's eyes softened instantly at the sight of them. His breath hitched. He took a single step forward, then stopped himself, unsure of what he was allowed to do. Brianna's heart pounded in her ears. The walls felt too close. The air felt too thin. She wasn't ready for this moment. The moment the past she'd kept sealed away met the future she had built with trembling determination. And yet here he was, and here they were. The entire bakery seemed to pause along with them. Even customers sensed something was unfolding, something private, something deeply human, though no one understood its weight. Every emotion he had kept buried rose to the surface. Confusion, guilt, longing, fear, and something else she couldn't name. 6 years of silence, now in one room together. Brianna swallowed hard. Warren nodded but didn't step back. He couldn't, not now, not after learning what he had learned, not after seeing the 3 small faces watching him with curiosity and uncertainty. This was the moment that would break everything open. For a moment, the small space between the curtain and the counter held more tension than any boardroom Warren had ever stood in. The children stared at him with open curiosity, unaware that their very existence was the reason he had walked through that door with trembling hands. Merritt, bold as sunrise, stepped out first. She planted her feet firmly, tilted her head, and asked in a voice that carried easily through the bakery, "Who are you?" Customers turned slightly, startled by her volume, but Merritt didn't seem to care. She was fearless, tiny, determined, and brimming with spirit. Warren opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He had spoken before presidents and investors, but he had never felt as unprepared as he did standing in front of this confident child. Before he could respond, Olin moved to block Merritt just a little, not aggressively but with a protective instinct, far too mature for his age. He angled his body in front of her, watching Warren with steady, suspicious eyes. Olin didn't speak. He didn't need to. His posture said everything. "Who are you, and why are you looking at my family?" Warren's chest tightened. He didn't deserve the boy's trust, not yet, maybe not ever, but the protective stance struck him deeply. He had missed 6 years of becoming someone this child could rely on. Then Neri stepped forward, her curiosity overpowering her caution. She held a crayon in one hand and her picture book in the other. Her big, thoughtful eyes traveled from Warren's face to his coat, then back up again. "Do we know you?" she asked softly. Her tone wasn't challenging. It was sincere, puzzled, and tinged with a kind of wonder unique to children who sense something important without understanding why. Warren swallowed hard. His voice was barely steady when he answered, "No, not yet." His words hung in the air. Neri blinked slowly, as if processing something she couldn't quite name. The faint crease between her brows deepened, her quiet sign of concentration. Merritt stepped closer, studying him. "You talk funny," she declared. "Are you from the city?" "Yes," Warren replied gently. Merritt gasped, delighted. "I knew it. He has city shoes." Olin didn't laugh. He simply stared, still guarded. His hand reached back, not for comfort, but to make sure his sister stayed behind him. The gesture pierced Warren harder than anything else had that day. He had never protected them, yet this small boy was doing it without hesitation. Brianna stepped quickly toward them, her breath uneven. "Kids," she said softly, "why don't we step to the back for a moment?" But the children didn't move right away. They were transfixed by Warren's presence, by the quiet tension radiating from their mother, by a moment they didn't understand but instinctively sensed was important. Warren felt himself drifting toward them, drawn by something he couldn't fight, but he stopped, not wanting to overwhelm them, especially not when their mother was already struggling to steady the situation. Finally, Olan took Merritt's hand. Neri slipped her crayon into her pocket. Together, they stepped back slightly, eyes still locked on Warren. 3 small faces, 3 lives he had never known, and each expression, bold, guarded, curious, struck him like a truth he could no longer outrun. Brianna's pulse hammered in her ears as she watched her children stare at Warren, each of them reacting in their own unmistakable way. Merritt bold, Olin guarded, Neri quietly drawn in. It was a moment she had feared for years, a moment she prayed would never arrive unexpectedly in front of customers in the middle of an ordinary morning. She forced her breath to steady and stepped quickly toward them. "Sweethearts," she said gently, her voice warm but strained, "let's go to the back room for a moment." Neri looked up at her with a small frown. "Why? Is something wrong?" "No, baby," Brianna whispered, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "I just need you 3 in the back for a bit." Merritt folded her arms, clearly energized by the excitement swirling in the air. "But he didn't answer my question," she announced, pointing at Warren. "Mama, he didn't say who he is." Brianna's heart clenched. She didn't look at Warren. She couldn't. Not yet. "We'll talk later," she said softly. "Come with me now." Olin tightened his grip on his sister's hands. His protective nature flared again as he stepped slightly in front of them, eyeing Warren one more time before turning away. That single glance felt like a verdict. A 6-year-old boy shouldn't need to act like a shield, and yet he did, effortlessly, instinctively. Warren felt a sharp twist deep in his chest, a mixture of awe and regret that nearly stole his breath. Brianna reached for the curtain, guiding the children behind her. Neri paused once more, her gaze drifting back to Warren with a mixture of curiosity and something softer, an unspoken question she didn't yet know how to ask. Warren's breath caught. She looked so much like... He dropped his gaze before the thought could finish. Inside the back room, Brianna knelt in front of the children. "Stay here," she whispered. "Play for a little while. I'll be right back." Merritt leaned close. "Are you okay, Mama?" Brianna nodded, but her voice cracked faintly. "Yes, love, I'm okay." Olin didn't move. He watched her carefully, sensing something was wrong even if he couldn't understand it. Only after she stroked his cheek did he reluctantly turn toward the small table. Neri reached for her picture book, though her eyes lingered on the doorway. Brianna drew in a slow breath, then stood. She pushed the curtain closed behind her and felt the weight of the moment settle onto her shoulders like something she had been carrying for years, but now had no choice but to confront. She walked back toward the front of the bakery. Each step felt heavier than the last. Warren was still standing, exactly where she had left him, hands lowered at his sides, eyes full of questions he had every right to ask. The room seemed smaller now, tighter. The air was stretched thin between them. She reached the counter, stopped, lifted her chin. "Come with me," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't harsh, wasn't angry. Warren followed her toward the small office at the back of the bakery, each step bringing them closer to a conversation 6 years overdue. The next morning, Whispering Hearth opened with its usual warmth, golden pastries cooling on the racks, the soft hum of ovens, and townspeople drifting inside for their daily comforts. But beneath the calm, Brianna moved with an unease she couldn't fully hide. She kept glancing toward the front door, trying to convince herself he wouldn't come back so soon. But he did. Just after 9, the door chimed and Warren stepped in, holding a paper bag in one hand and a box wrapped with far more tape than necessary in the other. He looked out of place, and he knew it. The polished CEO didn't fit among the rustic wooden shelves and flour-dusted counters, yet he looked more grounded here than in any boardroom he'd been in during the past 6 years. Brianna stiffened, but she didn't tell him to leave. Not today. Warren approached slowly, giving her room, giving the children room. "I brought something," he said, lifting the awkwardly wrapped box with a hesitant half-smile. Before Brianna could respond, the curtain at the back shifted. Merritt burst through first. Her eyes widened the instant she saw him, not scared, not worried, but suspicious with dramatic flair. "You came back," she announced, hands on her hips. Behind her, Olan appeared, sticking close to the doorway as though measuring the situation again. Neri followed last, clutching her book about planets. "Yes," Warren said softly. "I thought I'd try again." Merritt marched toward him, stopping only when she reached the counter. She pointed at the paper bag. "What's that?" Warren cleared his throat. "I tried baking." Brianna blinked. "You baked?" His cheeks warmed slightly. Attempted, he opened the bag and revealed a few lopsided cupcakes with frosting that leaned to one side as though exhausted from standing upright. There was a full 3 seconds of silence, and then Merritt burst into loud laughter, clutching her stomach dramatically. "These are terrible." Warren exhaled through a laugh he hadn't meant to let out. He glanced at her, a bit embarrassed, a bit amused. "I'm guessing you could do better?" Merritt nodded with full confidence. "Much better." Olin's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. Even Neri giggled into her hands. Brianna tried to hide it, but a small smile tugged at her mouth as well. Something about the sight, this powerful man standing in her bakery with crooked cupcakes, loosened a tension she didn't realize she'd been holding since the day before. Warren gently pushed the box toward the children. "And these are for you," he lowered his voice. "I hope I didn't pick the wrong things." Neri peeked into the box, her eyes lighting up. "Books," she gasped, "and crayons." Olin leaned in next. "Is this a truck?" Merritt reached in and grabbed a sparkly sticker sheet. "Yes." Their reactions weren't loud or chaotic. They were genuine. small bright sparks of joy that softened the edges of the moment. Warren watched them quietly, humbled. He didn't know how to be a father, and for the first time, Brianna didn't feel fear when he stepped closer. She felt the beginning of something she never expected to see again, a man trying. While Maureen inspected her new sticker sheet, and Olin carefully examined the toy truck from the box, Neri held her book against her chest and stared at Warren with bright, thoughtful eyes. She stepped closer, not boldly like Merritt, not cautiously like Olin, but with the soft confidence of a child who felt drawn toward a question she needed answered. "You brought books," she said, her voice gentle but clear. Warren nodded. "I wasn't sure what you liked, so I picked a few different ones." Neri flipped through the pages of the astronomy book he'd chosen. The illustrations glowed under the bakery lights, rings of planets, glowing stars, swirling galaxies. She stopped at a page showing the solar system. "Do you know about these?" she asked, pointing to the planets. Warren blinked, surprised. "I know a little, but you probably know more." Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Yes," he replied sincerely. "You look like someone who learns fast." That earned him a shy, pleased smile. She pulled a chair forward and sat, opening the book wide across the table. "Can you read this part with me?" she asked, tapping a paragraph about gravitational pull. Warren hesitated only long enough to check Brianna's expression. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't stopping him either. There was a guarded acceptance in her eyes, one that told him this moment mattered. So he sat, and Neri immediately leaned in closer, eager. "What does this word mean?" she asked, pointing to a term describing the force that keeps planets in motion. Warren explained it in the simplest way he could. But instead of nodding and moving on, Neri asked another question, and another, and another. "What about the stars? Why don't they fall? Do buildings fall if gravity changes? If someone lived in space, would their voice sound different? And machines, can they work in space too?" Her mind leaped from idea to idea with an energy that made Warren forget for a moment the heavy truth of why he had come here at all. He found himself smiling, genuinely, without effort. "You think about things most adults overlook," he told her. "That's special." Neri hugged her book. "Mom says asking questions means I'm growing." "She's right." He paused, voice softening. "Never stop asking." Brianna watched quietly from behind the counter. She had seen her daughter, fascinated before, but never this drawn to a new person, especially someone who was practically a stranger. Yet the way Warren answered each question, with patience, with interest, with soft awe, made something gentle stir inside her chest. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. But it was proof that he was trying to connect, not with guilt or pressure, but with genuine care, and Neri felt it. She kept asking questions not because she needed answers, but because she liked the way he listened. The first bond had been formed. While Neri engaged Warren with question after question, and Merritt proudly decorated her sticker sheet, Olin stayed quiet. He always did. He hovered behind his sister's toy truck clasped in his small hands, eyes fixed on Warren with a watchful seriousness that didn't match his age. He wasn't rude. He wasn't frightened. He was evaluating. Every movement Warren made, every word he spoke, every shift in his posture, Olin noticed it all. His gaze tracked Warren the same way a small guardian might watch a newcomer stepping into his home. Warren felt the stare long before he acknowledged it. When Neri paused to flip a page, Warren looked up. Something about the boy's quiet strength struck at Warren's chest, deeply, almost painfully. This little one had taken on the role of protector in a way that reminded him of everything he hadn't been there to provide. Trying not to overwhelm him, Warren shifted slightly closer but kept a respectful distance. "That truck looks well loved," he said softly. Olin didn't respond. "It's a good one," Warren added gently, "but it looks like the front wheel is loose." At that, Olin finally lifted his head. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped forward and set the truck on the table between them, as if offering a test, not of mechanical skill but of intention. Warren accepted the challenge without a word. He knelt beside the table, examining the broken wheel carefully. Olin watched every movement, eyes narrowed just the slightest bit, measuring how this unfamiliar man treated something important to him. Warren reached for a small toolkit he kept in his jacket, habit from years of travel and constant problem-solving. He selected a tiny screwdriver, steady-handed, and began working on the wheel. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast. It was patient, precise. Olan's breathing softened as the minutes passed. He leaned in closer, curiosity slowly replacing caution. "There," Warren murmured, tightening the last tiny screw. He rolled the truck gently across the table. "Good as new." Olan touched the repaired wheel, testing it. It stayed firm, solid. A faint, reluctant smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Without thinking, he stepped to Warren's side, standing just close enough that Warren felt the small presence beside him, warm and trusting. Olan didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silent acceptance was louder than any words he could have said. From behind the counter, Brianna exhaled softly. She had never seen Olan approach a stranger on his own, not like this. But here he was, following Warren step for step, watching him now not with suspicion, but with quiet interest. The second connection had formed. While Olan trailed Warren with growing trust, and Neri continued scribbling questions into the margins of her book, Merritt was busy finishing the sticker masterpiece she had declared the Sparkle Kingdom. Once satisfied with her creation, she hopped off her chair, chin tilted like a tiny queen approaching a foreign visitor. She marched straight to Warren. "You," she said, squinting up at him, "need help." Warren blinked. "Help with what?" Merritt tapped the paper bag that once held the lopsided cupcakes. Those were a disaster." He burst into a quiet laugh. "I know." She crossed her arms dramatically. "If you ever bring cupcakes into this bakery again, you have to prove you can actually frost them." Warren raised both hands in surrender. "All right, what do I need to do?" Merritt grinned as though she had been waiting her entire life for someone to ask that question. She marched to the counter and dragged over 2 stools. "This," she declared, "is a frosting competition." Brianna's eyebrows lifted. "Merritt, honey." "No, Mama, he has to try. He brought those sad cupcakes yesterday. We can't let that happen again." Warren tried to hide a smile. "I suppose I deserve that." Merritt loaded the counter with supplies, piping bags, bowls of colored frosting, sprinkles, and 2 plain cupcakes. "This one is yours," she said, pushing a cupcake toward him. "You get blue frosting." "I get pink. Any rules?" Warren asked. "Yes," she said confidently. "No crying when I win," Neri giggled. Olan leaned forward, intrigued. Brianna watched from the side, torn between laughter and shock at how quickly her daughter had pulled him into a challenge. Merritt filled her piping bag, demonstrating her skills with exaggerated motions. Warren copied her, although his hands moved far less smoothly. The moment he squeezed the bag, his frosting slumped sideways. Olan snorted quietly. Neri covered her mouth. Merritt placed a hand dramatically over her heart. "Oh no," she whispered. "It's happening again." Warren tried to fix the swirl, only to create a tilt so severe Merritt circled him like a baking judge. "This," she said gravely, "is worse than yesterday." He laughed in defeat. "I think you were right." Merritt finished her cupcake with flawless confidence, a perfect swirl, a dusting of sprinkles, and a triumphant smile. Then she leaned in close and whispered, "You let me win." Warren kept his voice just as soft, maybe a little. "Good," she whispered back, tapping his arm. "I like when people let me show how good I am, and just like that." The last wall fell. Her acceptance wasn't quiet or hesitant or subtle. It was loud, bright, and full of personality. Merritt hopped down from her stool and announced to the bakery, "He's not that bad." Brianna looked at Warren, really looked, and saw something unmistakable. Her children were opening their hearts to him. And despite everything, he was opening his to them too. The bakery closed with a soft click of the door, and the town quieted under a settling evening breeze. Flower dust still hovered gently in the warm lights as Brianna wiped the counters. Warren rolled up his sleeves without being asked and began stacking trays. Their movements fell into a strange harmony, different from their old life but somehow familiar. When they reached for the same sheet pan, their hands brushed. The small contact startled them both. Brianna froze first. Warren's breath caught just a fraction behind hers. No words, just a soft awareness hanging between them. And then, unexpectedly, a shared memory rose. He chuckled. "And you pretended it tasted perfect." They laughed softly, fragile, warm, like rediscovering a forgotten rhythm. Later they sat at a small table near the ovens, the soft hum filling the silence. For the first time in years, they allowed themselves to speak from the heart, with no defenses, no pride, no polished lines. Warren looked at his hands. I was so focused on building a world for us that I didn't notice I was losing the real world we already had. Brianna swallowed, her voice tightening. And I was scared. I tried to tell you, then I convinced myself you were too far away to hear me. He lifted his eyes slowly. I wasn't gone because I stopped caring, Bray. I was gone because I thought success would make everything right, and I thought silence would protect us, she whispered. Their truths finally met in the space between them. A quiet settled, deep and inviting, the kind that brings fragile honesty out of hiding. Warren, she whispered, fingers tightening around her cup. Do you ever wish things had gone differently? He didn't look away this time. Every day. The honesty made her breath tremble. He leaned forward, just slightly, not enough to close the distance, but enough for her to feel the weight of his sincerity. They didn't kiss. They didn't rush. A flame rekindled, gently. Warm lighting filled the bakery as life began settling back into its daily rhythm. The narrator's reflection softened, laying quiet truths between scenes of the family growing closer. Presence was more valuable than prosperity. Warren learned that no achievement could replace the comfort of being physically and emotionally present. Late-night cleanups and bedtime stories carried more weight than corporate victories. Apology became courage. Brianna didn't face him with bitterness, but with honesty, and Warren apologized not to erase the past, but to honor the hurt inside it. A shift, the children giggling over spilled flour. Truth released them. Brianna's choice to reveal her fears finally gave both of them room to grow. Secrets bind, truth frees. Another shift, Olin handing Warren the repaired truck. Forgiveness had to be earned. Warren didn't come with grand gestures. He came with consistency. Actions replaced promises. And love didn't have to return in the same form. Their connection no longer blazed with youthful intensity. It carried steadiness, care, understanding, and depth. But peace never lasts without challenge. Warren's visits didn't remain private for long. Paparazzi began lingering near the town entrance. A tabloid headline leaked. CEO's secret trips to unknown bakery. What is he hiding? Brianna felt her stomach drop. Exposure was her greatest fear. I don't want the kids dragged into a spotlight they never asked for, she told him, voice trembling. The tension finally cracked. I won't let them be used, she said sharply. Warren stepped back, hurt etching across his face. I'm not trying to take them. I'm trying to be there. I know, she cried, but your world, your name, it can swallow people whole. And I won't let that happen, he insisted, desperate for her to hear him. But fear and guilt collided, clouding both their judgments. Hours later, after emotions cooled, Warren returned. Not angry, not defensive. I'll protect them. Even if it means stepping away from cameras. Even if it costs me deals. Their safety comes first. Brianna believed him, because his voice carried no pride, only truth. Together they set boundaries. No photos, no public statements, no bringing the kids into his business world. Only quiet, careful co-parenting. A snowy afternoon changed everything. Merritt climbed a small ladder outside the bakery to fix a holiday decoration. Her foot slipped. She fell onto the cold sidewalk, crying in shock. Neri screamed. Olin panicked, frozen where he stood. Warren arrived faster than anyone expected, coat unbuttoned, breath clouding in the cold. He knelt beside Merritt, voice steady and warm. You're okay, sweetheart. I've got you. He cleaned the scrape with practiced gentleness, wrapped it carefully, then lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. On the drive to the clinic, he sang silly, off-key songs until her tears softened into laughter. Neri rested her head against his arm. Olin held his seatbelt as though grounding himself. That evening, under the warm glow of kitchen lights, Brianna found him sitting at the table, exhausted but peaceful. He looked up. I'm here, he said, not dramatic, not rehearsed, just true. For the first time, she believed the man in front of her wasn't the same one she had left. In the months that followed, life bloomed slowly around them. Not in grand gestures, but in simple, steady moments. Breakfast together, shared chores, evening walks, family laughter echoing through the bakery. Parenthood wove them together naturally, with no pressure. Their romance rekindled not through fairy tale scenes, but through real ones. Hands brushing while packing lunches, eyes meeting when the kid said something funny. Quiet talks after bedtime. They didn't pretend the past hadn't hurt. They simply built something steady, something honest. One evening, the sun dipped low across the town, painting everything in warm gold. Brianna walked beside Warren on the sidewalk, Olin leaning against her, Merritt swinging Warren's hand, and Neri pointing out shapes in the clouds above them. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was peaceful. It was healing. And it was theirs. Family. This story teaches us. Humility makes space for healing. Patience rebuilds what pride once fractured. Showing up matters more than showing off. Family, what lesson touched your heart the most today? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every message. And if this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another moment here at Mr. Williams Story Time. May your home be peaceful. May your steps be blessed. And may your heart stay full.